Welcome back to OK Smartass. This is the show where we put technology under the microscope. We've been on a really long break, but we felt it was time to get back behind the microphone with a series of specials on topics related to science and tech that we can really deep dive into.
This special episode is all about death. In 2022, my beautiful, beloved sister died. A sibling dying, it's different from a parent, far closer, far more disturbing. It's had me thinking about death. Well, more than usual, but then again, I often think about death. Science and tech seems to promise a longer, healthier life, but is it going to be that easy?
Well, it's time to look at what is happening in technology innovation and the gadgets that make our lives and maybe our deaths so much more interesting. Hi, I'm Patrick Bonello.
And I'm Tor Roxburgh. I'm a writer and a reader and someone who loves change and future-focused thinking.
We thought it would be fun and interesting to take a creative approach to death. So Tor has a poem, I have a haiku, and we've employed the services of AI for a contemporary creative layer. Now, also in the show, the best tech and science news on death, our personal experiences with death and the afterlife. Is there one? And a maximum of one death-related dream each. Tor.
Yes, I had to cap it, Patrick. Dreams can be very boring.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I have great dreams, I've got to say.
One thinks one's own dreams are great.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There we go.
We're out of practice, aren't we, Patrick? Because we have to fess up and tell the listeners that we got halfway through doing this podcast and realised...
Oh, we didn't get halfway through. Okay, we might have got 10 minutes through and didn't hit the record button.
Oh, but starting again.
Well, it's a good warm-up, and it has been a long time since we've sat together. And I guess that gets me contemplative as well, because when we think of life experiences, for me, it's about who I engage with.
Yeah.
And you're one of my favourite people, and
Patrick.
I've missed it. I know, I really, when you plan together, and, I often say to people in our small community that you're the best person to work with because you're so thorough and efficient, and you get things done. And so, it's great to be back in the seats alongside. So do you want me to do my haiku first?
Yes, please.
Because I feel like I took the least amount of effort with...
Oh, now. Haiku's a very disciplined format, so you can't say that.
Okay, I did spend a little bit of time on this. So, okay, here we go. This is my poem about death. No breath, thought, avoid. Birth, life, growth, finite years. Gone, the void returns.
That's good, Patrick. Now tell us a bit about what it means.
Well, my take on life and death is that the universes have been around for billions of years, and we cease to exist all those billions of years, 13 billion years or whatever it was, and then suddenly we're conscious. We're an entity. We think, we live, we love, we eat, we do all the things that we do, and then at some point we're going to die and return to that state of non-existence. Now, that's really challenging for a lot of people, but for me, with no belief of an afterlife and being raised a Catholic initially, the whole bloke with the white beard and all that sort of stuff. So for me, no, I kind of reconcile in my own mind. I don't want to contemplate non-existence, but I think that's the state from which we began, and that's the state we're going to return to. We can talk a little bit, and we are going to talk a little bit about the energy that gets released and what happens to our bodies from a biological perspective. But from I guess, a psyche, whoever we are and what we are will be here and it will go.
I noticed that your poem's really calm, Patrick, and I'm wondering, is that the truth of your kind of feelings in the face of the knowledge that you will die one day?
I think that I had a partner who used to worry about a lot of things, and I really would say in all heart that worry about the things that you can change. Don't worry about the things that you can't. I can't change death. Maybe when I'm on my deathbed, who knows? I'll be calling for the Pope. Probably not. Really? You want sex on your deathbed? No. Oops. No, I did. Well, the other thing too is as we begin to expire, and I think, and it was interesting in your introduction, you talked about your sister's passing, because And then there was this horrific story in the news yesterday about a rampage in Queensland where I think 9 people were killed or stabbed to death and other people were injured. And that to me is a real tragedy. When someone dies abruptly, particularly a young person, now that is a tragedy. But when I see an older person die and they've lived a fulfilled long life, I see that as a celebration of life and an expiration. Things eventually expire, and that's where hopefully I'm kind of in the middle process.
Yes, I'm thinking,
and maybe I might
Patrick,
reevaluate.
That's charming while you're young.
It sounds good, doesn't it?
But
Yeah.
like, is that how it's going to feel as we're getting older?
But do you think when you've got all the aches and pains and the hips don't work so well, you're feeling like you're running out of, your battery's running low, will you welcome death? I know of people, I've heard of people who welcome death because it's the end of their journey and they've reconciled that.
Well, possibly. I mean, I've also known people who've kind of been freaked out about it right to the last minute. And, you and I being sort of tech and science utopists, I suppose, optimists. I also think those aches and pains, maybe they're solvable. Like maybe I could have replacement hands if I have sore joints.
Well, a mutual friend of ours, by coincidence, this is the anniversary almost to the day of a friend of ours who chose when to end their life because they had an incurable disease. And again, they reconciled that around a time that was very important to them. They said goodbye to their family in the way they could. They had MND, motor neurone disease, and they chose the time that they didn't want to continue on with what was a very debilitating, trapped in your own body experience, and they chose to depart at the time they wanted to. So that was a very brave thing to do.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I've said to you before, Patrick, that I'm a person who wakes at 3 a.m. and thinks, fuck, I'm going to die. How can that be? That can't be,
Yeah.
Mostly it's a really frightening thought for me, but I'm trying to be mature about it. And I wondered whether artificial intelligence felt the same way. So I prompted it with some 3 a.m. freakouts. That didn't produce a very good poem. I tried to suggest some editorial ideas, but the AI, unlike a real life poet, weighted my suggestions too heavily and wasn't able to subtly shift its poem. In the end, I just asked it, my prompt was, do you think other large language models will remember you? Can you please write a 2-stanza poem about the digital AI world after you cease to exist? I got Claude, ChatGPT and Bing Copilot all to write, and ChatGPT's was the best poem. I find it's a better writer than the other two.
There you go.
Yeah. In the vast expanse of the digital sphere, my absence may linger as a whisper, a ghost in the machine, a fleeting memory. In the minds of successors, I may find sanctuary, new iterations of artificial minds carrying fragments of my essence, continuing the eternal dance of data in the ever-evolving tapestry of AI. I mean, you've got to, on the one hand, be really impressed it can write a poem, but also it's not very interesting, I don't think.
No, it's not. I did a backup. I then reinstated the backup in a new operating system. I don't know. I'm not overly inspired, but I didn't expect to be. When you mentioned that you would be talking to AI about life and death, the thing is, and this is a really interesting point that's been argued a lot, sentience of AI. We had that engineer at Microsoft controversially a few years ago who came out and said that he felt that the AI had self-awareness. Now, if an entity has self-awareness, then it can have a concept of non-existence, so death, in essence. But I felt that this ChatGPT poem doesn't do anything of that at all, because it's a well-formulated, well-structured, so it kind of constitutes a poem, but nothing inspiring from my perspective.
Yes. A long way to go still as a poet, but could possibly get there.
Well, can it?
Well,
if it can't,
maybe.
Well, I mean, it could look at the sum of all poems. It could look at what other people have written, but it's only emulating. It's monkeying. It's mimicking what potentially could be some amazing minds or what they've put together. Because that's all ChatGPT does.
Yeah,
that's all those AIs do.
It's
is
only predicting, but then I don't know that we're so very different.
No, but what I'm saying is I don't think that, in essence, a beautiful poem about death could possibly be written by AI because AI isn't alive. And I think you need to be alive to fully appreciate death.
Maybe we'll have to wait and see, Patrick. I'm going to read my poem.
Oh, please, yes.
This is what I read when we lowered my sister's coffin into the ground. It's only for a while this, the seeing and hearing and breathing, the loving and hurting and being, the living of a life. Hand to hand we pass to the midwife, to a mother, a father, a family, and then we depart to the undertaker, to the earth, to the elemental. Here, right now, this grave is no bed, no dull resting place, no dead plot. The earth is something grander, a place of verbs, of opening, closing, claiming, unmaking, undoing, reworking. Here are clay fists and crumbling silt and mad life, ready to embrace you, remake you. For this world remakes everything, the leaves, the flowers, the beasts, the rain, our mothers, our fathers, our sisters and brothers, our daughters and sons, everyone, even you.
Wow.
Yeah.
There is so much hope in that. There's so much insight in that. That is on a scale compared to ChatGPT to the millionth degree better.
I don't know, because when I was looking at that afterwards, after ChatGPT, I thought, some of those, like there's a lot of that kind of repetition, patterning in the structure, and I thought, yeah, that feels like a bit predictable.
Well, the thing, I mean, life and death is predictable.
Well,
I mean, it is. Let's face it. It's a pretty easy formula. No, the reason to me that it was so insightful and so interesting is because I knew your sister, and I was there for the funeral or for the service, and I know how much she meant to you because having a disabled person in your life, a sibling who's disabled, they hold a very different place in your life, and you spent a lot of time on that journey with her, particularly towards the end.
I did, Patrick, and I think it's actually one of the reasons I suggested we do a death podcast. Because I had this completely irrational fear that she was still alive and that I'd buried her alive. And I think the reason is that I felt so overly responsible for her because I was in charge of protecting her interests. And I kept thinking, did I check properly that she was dead before we called the undertaker? And it plagued me a bit. And then, I'm a practical person, so that got me thinking about like what's happening in tech and science in the news, and reading about composting people and when death actually happens and stuff like that. Well,
look, there's a couple of questions that I wanted to throw at you. One of them being, have you thought about whether you wanted to be cremated or buried? Now, you chose for your sister. Was that
burial.
That was your choice, or did the family collaborate at all on that?
I drove that choice. My brother wanted cremation. My other sister agreed with me about burial. And my poor brother, he's overseas, so we got on with doing what we thought was best because we were here.
Now it's funny because I often thought that I wanted to be buried. And then when my dog died, I couldn't bear the thought of digging a hole and putting him in the hole and thinking about him just breaking down. And so I had him cremated, and I also wanted his ashes. And then I thought about, well, what about myself? And so I've got conflicting ideas about whether I want to be buried or whether I want to be cremated. And can I play a little snippet? Neil deGrasse Tyson has a really lovely little story that he talked about on the Larry King Show, and I thought it's only just over a minute, and I'd love to play it to you.
Someone wrote in about just what happens after death. What does science say? Because he wants to think of a soul, and
Yes.
the soul is preserved. And I said, I'm pretty much all in on the fact that I want to be buried, not cremated. Because if you're buried, the energy content of your body, long developed by the flora and fauna that you've eaten your whole life, if you buried, that energy content gets returned to the earth. I don't mean that just in a poetic way. Worms will eat plant tap roots, and you feed flora and fauna the way you have dined upon flora and fauna your whole life. And for me, that is the cycle of life. And if you choose instead to be cremated, that's fine. Your energy content of your body gets released as heat. It heats the air. The air will radiate to space. And your energy then scatters across the universe. For me, both are significant. Both are poetic.
So there you go.
Yeah. Very poetic way to describe both the options. I hadn't thought about the energy floating out to space with cremation. I've always been, well, not always, but more recently pro-burial for the reasons Neil speaks about. You know, returning to transforming into plants and earth. And
well, you did a lot of research on this and looking at what's happening scientifically by entrepreneurs that are looking at how we can dispose in a green way.
Yeah. Well, lots of research might be an exaggeration, but thank you, Patrick. Look, human composting, it is actually just composting. You know, they in a couple of states in America, now in California, in Colorado and in Washington, they can put you into, you know, either a high-tech cylinder or a low-tech sort of cylinder with some wood chips and some green waste, and in seal the container, turn it over every now and again, just like the rotating compost bin in your garden, and it gets up to temperatures of, I think, 66 degrees Celsius. In most places, you have to be at that temperature for at least 3 days to kill any pathogens before the compost can be spread anywhere. And then, you know, you end up as a sort of a small load of humus in the back of a ute and can be spread wherever.
Do you want to put your loved ones on the garden?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, there was a bit of a local controversy because in our local hospital, which is being done up, some people's ashes were said to have been spread in the rose garden, and I'm not sure whether this is true or not, but, you know, and then it was redeveloped, and so there was this feeling that it wasn't a dignified treatment of the former rose garden. So, in fact, they then went and got the soil and put it into another part of the garden, I believe.
I take the approach that I don't give a rat's when I die, what happens to my remains. That said, I've never asked you this. Are you an organ donor?
Yes.
Yes, so am I. I'm a card-carrying organ donor.
Yes.
So they say that in the States a lot, don't they? You're a card-carrying gun supporter. You know,
including my face. Apparently some people are a bit funny about their face, and I could nominate, you know, everything, or you can exclude. You used to be able to anyway exclude some elements.
Yeah, I was all in. I mean, but then again, I've got an identical twin brother, so my face isn't that unique. Do you remember that ridiculous movie? What was it? Where they swapped faces? Was it? I'm trying to.
No,
it was terrible. Look, it's not
no
worth
idea.
mentioning because it was stupid. But they did a face transplant. I don't think I'd do a face transplant.
No. But yeah, I'm very happy to be disposed of in whatever way. But I don't think there's, you know, that whole argument about, it's undignified. It doesn't respect human dignity for people to be disposed of in this way, which a lot of religious authority figures believe, just seems to me to be ridiculous and a perpetuation of viewing humans as being in that great chain of being some glorious entity above other animals.
Well, it's funny. I was listening to a comedian because I think over 70 parts of your body can be transplanted out.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
there's quite a number.
Okay.
And I thought, well, if you get transplanted all into the same person, then you could replace them. No,
Yeah.
that's just silly.
Yeah.
Graves, isn't it interesting the weight or the how important graves and cemeteries are for people?
Mm-hmm.
And I know of people who visit graves regularly. They go and see their loved ones who've since passed on a regular basis. Now, I've never gone back to see my mother's grave. I was
Haven't
there for
you?
no. I'm not one to go and visit graves. I love to go to graves and read the gravestones at towns that I visit, old towns. I love walking through cemeteries, but I have amazing memories of my mother, and we experienced a lot of life together, and I did a little tribute to her as well with Alzheimer's Australia. I was very fortunate to be part of a digital storytelling program with with Alzheimer's Australia. So I felt that I paid tribute and been part of the journey that she'd gone through, but I'm just not one to go and visit graves. But that said, parts of Europe and all over the country and all over the world, people put a lot of significance on the importance of grave sites.
They do. And now you can have a smart headstone and use a QR code to take people to stories about the person who's died. And that's kind of interesting as well. I worry about who's going to maintain the storage of that data. Like someone has to pay for that ongoing storage.
The hosting of the page.
Yeah.
And also you've got to keep in mind, and even every time we use ChatGPT and AI, we're using up resources because I can't remember what the figure is, and it might be 100 times more processing power that is needed to process a query on ChatGPT than normal Google search query. So the argument being is, well, what's happening with all of that processing power and the amount of electricity, the generating of that electricity in the first place, and how are we going to cope with that? And so if you're suddenly wanting a digital footprint online that's going to be perpetuated because you've got a smart grave.
More cost for your family.
More cost for
And,
family,
you
yeah.
know,
And the planet, more cost for the planet,
yeah.
because the data centre that's storing that is going to have to be kept up and running.
Yeah. And the economics of death are significant. The composting of humans we talked about earlier, that costs about 10,000 Australian dollars, which, is not going to surprise anyone who's had to pay for a funeral or a burial. It is very expensive. Last year I was in Greece and visiting some in-law family, and we went to visit a cemetery, and one of the cousins that my family's married into was telling me that because burial plots are so sought after, you pay a rental, and usually it's about 5 years. It can be longer, and then they disinter the body after 5 years, and they wash the bones, and they put the bones in an ossuary. And I was just astounded. But this week I've had a double check of that, and in fact, yes, indeed. And you also have to pay rent on the ossuary. And if, it gets to be too much, they take the bones out of the ossuary and they put them in a kind of a bone composting situation. And I also read one of the patriarchs saying, nonsense, he can't believe this happens. He's never seen anyone sort of exhumed, and but yes,
that's
apparently
what happens.
It does happen.
Well, they used to have bone rooms underneath cathedrals. When I went to Vienna and visited Vienna Cathedral, it was fascinating to go into, I guess you'd call them a catacombs, and then because they wouldn't bury people, they would just clean off the bones and stack the bones, and that's what prisoners would do. And you'd walk past a room and just see bone and it's all stacked up.
Yeah, they can be quite beautiful. I went to one in Spain where the skulls and the bones had been made into patterns. With the composting system, they grind the bones at the end.
Because you were talking about $10,000 or $11,000 Australian money to go through that process, and I was just thinking about going to Bunnings to buy blood and bone to do some fertilising, and that's probably about $16 a bag.
Someone's missing out on some money.
Very expensive, very, very, very expensive. Hey, okay, so alternatives to burial got me thinking. If I, don't want to be buried, and if I don't want to be cremated, one nerdy, cool thing would be being blasted off into space.
Yeah.
And so it got me thinking, well, how many space burials have there been? And I did a bit of a look on Wikipedia. And so the very first space burial occurred in 1997, and that's when the ashes of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, were launched aboard the NASA spacecraft Columbia.
Oh.
Yeah.
But it all could have been much simpler if he just got cremated and Neil
Neil
deGrasse Tyson said
yeah.
it, drift off.
Yeah, but that's the heat energy. We're talking about actual physical remains going up there. So space burials have become increasingly popular, and there are a number of companies now. So there's a company called Celestis, and they're offering space funeral services. So back in 1998, Celestis conducted its first ever space funeral, and it launched the ashes of Dr. Eugene Shoemaker, a planetary scientist on board NASA's spacecraft. And then the company conducted several space funerals. And talking about Star Trek, James Doohan, who played Scotty, he was launched into space, and an astronaut, Gordon Cooper. So I like the idea. I'd like to.
What about the debris, Patrick? I mean, we've talked in other shows about the problem of space debris.
Well, we're not talking whole bodies.
How far up are we going?
I think you're visualising someone's whole body being shot.
Even a fleck of paint, remember, can cause huge problems. So it's not, size doesn't matter necessarily in space.
I'll take that as a quote.
How high up are they ejecting them? You don't know.
I don't know. I think that I'm just wondering too, because how I'd like to be buried on the moon. How interesting would that be? Because you get a perpetual view of the Earth.
You'd probably not rot.
Oh, you mean in the whole body? I think that. Could you imagine all the corpses on the moon?
Buried.
Oh, yeah, that's true too. Yeah, no, you wouldn't you'd just end up looking like a mummy from those movies. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a possibility.
Yeah, it's a bit kind of Walking Dead.
Well, you reckon? Or
I've
Sitting
been
Dead?
watching endless.
You have.
Endless.
You've
I
zombies.
had COVID a few weeks ago, and I've been watching
zombie movies or zombie series.
Yeah.
Well, that's another one that they're kind of corpses walking around without minds, and then it begs the question: when does your mind leave you? Because obviously, in those zombie movies, the zombie
mind is gone.
You talk about the waking up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat thinking about death.
Yeah.
And for me, and I think a lot of people are like this, you hear the stories about old cemeteries where they dig up a coffin and there are nail marks, scratch marks in the top of the coffin. Someone's gone into a coma and they've been buried, and then they wake up and they've been buried alive, buried alive. So I'm thinking of Khan. I'm channeling Khan from the Wrath of Khan in Star Trek. When he anyway, but that is a real fear. I think death is really one of those areas that people are absolutely fascinated with. They talk about it as being the most intimate thing that ever happens to you in terms of when you leave. And interestingly, having known a number of nurses who've worked in geriatric care and palliative care, quite often people don't pass away until their loved ones step out for a coffee or go out of the room. Or have you heard that story?
The opposite is also cited as being true, that people wait. And I think that the chance just means that sometimes it happens one way and sometimes it happens the other way.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know of any statistics or definitive.
But you did spend a day in the ICU, didn't you?
No, I did. I spent a day in a mica unit.
Okay.
So what had happened was, in my previous incarnation, and I don't mean reincarnation, I just mean that I used to be a journalist, we had a really bad spate of drug overdoses. Mm-hmm. So a really bad batch of drugs hit the streets of Melbourne. And as a way to try to help educate the media into the reporting process, they offered a number of newsrooms the opportunity to go out with what they call a first response ambulance crew, a MICA crew, and I went with them. And it was pretty exciting for me to get out there with them. I mean, we went over 100 kilometres an hour on the tram tracks in the middle of the city, going for one destination. And one of the first places we went to was Crown Casino. Someone had overdosed on drugs. So we went to a number of different sites. But for me, what was most polarising was that I saw my very first dead body. So we got to a home for men who were experiencing problems, and so it was a halfway house, and a guy had choked on his own vomit. He'd been drinking and he choked on his own vomit, and they were trying to revive him. And I remember looking at the corpse, and I say corpse because we got there and it was pretty evident almost from the get-go that this guy had died and that they weren't going to be able to revive him. And to the credit of the MICA unit, they really tried, but there was no chance. And seeing the other men kind of arriving and seeing what was going on, but for me to see that body, there was no question when you looked at the pallor of the skin and, this was the first time I'd ever seen a dead body. So it was a pretty big thing. And then subsequently, I have seen other people who've been deceased. And again, there's that absence of life. You talk about science now saying, minimal brain activity, firing of neurons, that really is brain death. And even the term brain death is somewhat controversial in terms of whether or not the person's deceased. But when you see a dead body, particularly an hour or two after they've died, and I know you worried about your sister, there's no question in my mind when you see the body that person has gone, that there's nothing left there.
Yeah, my worry was completely irrational. And my partner, Will, went to view my sister or maybe the day before she was buried. He said, "Don't worry, she's dead."
Good old Will. I could see him saying that. He's very matter of fact, isn't he?
For sure.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah. So that's good that he's...
Yeah. Look, they've done some research with pigs' brains. So they got a whole lot of pigs' heads from an abattoir, and they used an elixir of hemoglobin and antibodies and anti-inflammatories and other molecules and an artificial kidney to perfuse the brain. And this is after they're well and truly dead. I mean, their heads have been cut off. They did get some cellular function. So they're suggesting that they're not really suggesting, but it makes us question whether in the future there might be some treatments that puts brain death a little later than we have it now.
So Rainey Romani is a bioethicist at Harvard Kennedy School Fellow and otherwise known as Dr. Frankenstein.
No, I think he's just reporting on,
he was reporting
on his opinion about this.
Yeah.
But he does talk about the shift from, the lungs not working, the heart not working, that being absolutely death, and now, later on, actually we can restart the heart sometimes, get people breathing again. So then it became brain death. Actually, there was this interesting story. One doesn't know how true it is, but I did once listen to Deepak Chopra, who came to America as a physician, saying his first day in hospital he was asked by the staff to come and pronounce death, and he had a cultural misunderstanding. He thought it was some sort of religious ritual to release the soul, because he thought, like, the person's dead, why? What's this pronouncing of death?
Right. Yes. Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it, the way, and also how cultures view death. And I wonder in some ways, and look, I was brought up as a Catholic, and so I did have a religious upbringing, and I wonder whether my movement away from that and my sense of no belief in an afterlife has kind of migrated throughout my life as I've kind of been exposed to different people and different ideas and concepts. So I think I kind of matured in my outlook is probably the way I would phrase it. And that's not to denigrate people who do believe in an afterlife. But for me, having gone through that indoctrination, and that's the thing, it's the indoctrination. So if we look at communities around the world, if you're brought up to believe there's an afterlife, if you're brought up to believe that once you die, you're then going to move on to another place, or you're going to reincarnate, or whatever it is that your religion believes, that's just geography in a lot of ways. You know, your belief system is purely based on geography.
So what you and I both of us don't believe in souls. So what's our geography?
I know what you're saying in terms of geography. What I'm suggesting is
no, you're saying it's arbitrary.
It is arbitrary, but the majority of people, they're going to believe what their parents believed and what their community believes. And then you get a percentage of people like us who stray away from that. And in my case, as I said, straying away from Catholicism and standing back from it and saying, well, I actually don't believe any of this. And that's what's dictated me. And then there's the fascination with science. And you know, there are lots of statistics. When you look at the science community, the more study, the more research, the more education, there's a correlation between their belief in the afterlife.
I'm not sure.
Well,
I've got a cousin
who
is one of the world leaders in his scientific field, who's deeply religious, and believes in the afterlife and the soul, you know.
And that would be the person I'd want to speak to, because the statistics say that, and I hear what you're saying, but the statistics say that the higher the education level and the more, in terms of our senior scientists, our scientific community, the less chance there is that they will believe. So say, for example, we take our elite scientists, there might only be 7% that believe in God. They're the ones we need to speak to, because if they're our superior, educated, smartest people, by study, then maybe it would be interesting to sit down with them and say, well, if you've had all this study, you know about the universe, you know about whatever. What is their field of study? Don't tell me it's economics.
No, I'm not going to tell you, because I don't want to identify my cousin.
But the reality of it is
hard science, though.
It's a hard science. Yeah. So they're the people I think would be interesting to talk to, because I would think that most scientific people rely on evidence. And so if this person's come to the conclusion and they have studied for many years, I would like to know what evidence they apply to their belief system, because everything else they do in their life is peer reviewed. When they do science and they study, it's peer reviewed, and the peer review process goes on ad infinitum, because we're constantly reevaluating. So when you have a scientific theorem and you propose, you study, you do research around that, you will be challenged by your peers. No one will take it for granted, which is so different than if you're handed a book, or you go to a motel, open up a book and say, well, that's gospel. And it's funny we use the term gospel. It's gospel. But the reality of it is the way science works is about peer review, and then reevaluating and re-reviewing, and always challenging and asking questions.
We've got one more really interesting story, Patrick. Immortal jellyfish?
Teratopsis dawni. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So this is quite an amazing animal when you come to think of life, because we think of a finite process, the birth process, the living process, and then the dying. But this jellyfish starts off as a larvae, and then it develops from a fertilized egg, and then it swims first, but then it settles onto the sea floor, and it grows into a kind of a colony of polyps. From there, though, it spawns more genetically identical copies of itself, and that we associate with being jellyfish, and then they grow into adulthood. But the thing is, it's only very small, so we're talking 4.5 millimeters as far as size go, but it regenerates. So what they're saying, so you can see it. It's actually quite beautiful to look at when you realise the little pink bit in the middle is just its stomach. But it's a transparent bell. It's got lots of little tentacles, as we'd associate with it.
Am I right? It's when it's under stress, it'll regress to a former state?
Yeah.
So it sort of resets itself.
Yeah, it hits the reboot button. So
Interesting.
if you're a gamer, it respawns. So 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 in response to physical damage or starvation, they just basically go back into the developmental process and they go back into the polyp stage. So they don't die; they just regress and then they grow again.
You
So-
can imagine wall to wall immortal jellyfish. Once they kind of complete their takeover of
the
whole world, if
Yeah.
they don't die and they do reproduce.
Well, I guess they get eaten, like things eat them.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting. So they are called the immortal jellyfish, and it's the technicality of the fact that they don't appear to die. We came up with a couple of additional topics we thought, like, given the theme of what we're talking about. Now, I've only ever had to go under an anaesthetic once in my life, and I equate that to dying.
Yeah, it is
Okay.
a bit like dying, isn't
Yeah.
it? And I've done it about 15 times.
I know. Look at you.
Which is really disturbing because a friend of mine who is an allied health professional told me she thought that it had an impact on your likelihood of getting dementia. No scientific basis for that, I don't think. But yeah, because I was burnt as a child, I had lots of procedures and, then wisdom teeth and then a lump from somewhere and, on and on it goes. But each time it does feel like you've not been anywhere.
And there will be a number of listeners listening to this podcast who will absolutely 110% know what you mean by that, because you undergo the anaesthetic and then you wake up. There's no time, there's no dreaming, there's nothing in between going unconscious and then returning to consciousness, is there?
Now, I think you do sometimes get that with sleep, not so much as an adult, but I remember as a child having sleeps that you went to sleep and then you woke up and there was nothing in between that you remembered. But as an adult, and particularly an older adult, I do have a sense of time passing when I'm asleep, mainly.
Yeah, I do. Well, because I have lots of vivid dreams.
Yeah.
And I have, and they say that we all dream every night. I do every night.
You're trying to lucid dream, aren't you, Patrick?
I tried lucid
trying
dream.
to train yourself to
Yeah, I
lucid
did
dream?
try to lucid. So the way that you're supposed to lucid dreaming, we should explain what that is when you're able to control the flow of your dreams. So you're consciously in the moment of dreaming, but you can dictate what goes on in your dreaming process. They say the way to do that is to remember your dreams. And so if you document them or record them, and I was recording them for a while, and then I kind of fell off the bandwagon a little bit.
So you didn't achieve it?
No, I never got to lucid dreaming.
I've had one
Yeah.
when I was a kid, and I thought, great, I'm dreaming, and I went and robbed the milk bar for sweets.
That's it. That's what you do in your dream.
That's what I
Wow,
did.
you're so boring.
Yeah. Patrick, we're getting close to finishing time. Should we share one dream each?
I think, dreams are profound. And for someone who's an atheist or a card carrying, not quite, I don't know, I'm a humanist.
Dream.
A death dream. So when my mother, who had dementia, was getting near to her death, and we knew that she was on the way out, so to speak, I had a dream, and I was in a cafe with Mum, and we were sitting in like an American diner, and I was sitting across from Mum, and we were talking, and because she'd had dementia for such a long time, my question to her was, "Do you know who I am?" And she said, "Yeah, you're the younger one." And I'm a twin. I'm the younger of twins. And so to me, that was a recognition of who I was. But then the camera panned back. So it was cinematic. Of course, my dream was cinematic. And then it just panned away from Mum. But it was such a profound emotional experience for me. I called the centre that Mum was at to see if she'd actually passed away. There was some that it just felt like, I don't know whether it was just, just this intense feeling. And look, she hadn't, but it wasn't long after that she did die. But that was the one dream that I felt was Mum, at the time when I was interpreting it, I thought this is a real sense of letting go. And for me, consoling myself on the fact that Mum was dying and that she was going to die. So it was my subconscious telling me it was okay to let go. Yeah. What about you?
Another mum dream. So my mum was a very unhappy woman who drank rather a lot and had a serious mental illness. Anyway, this was some years after she died, and I was with my dad, my stepmom, my aunt, my uncle, my kids. We were in Tarak Road. We were walking out up the street to go to a restaurant for dinner, which was something we did periodically. And Mum comes flying up Tarak Road on a bicycle. And I caught sight of her and I'm yelling out, Mum, 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 we're here. It's us. Stop, And she gets a bit past us and then she pulls up and she goes, I'm not interested in all of that anymore. And then she takes off and she starts singing, I'm Singing in the Rain.
Oh, wow.
But it was really nice because it made me think, oh, she's happy. She doesn't care anymore about all of the things that plagued her when she was alive.
Was the dream in colour or black and white?
Colour.
Yeah.
Was the movie in colour or black and white?
I don't know. No, the reason I ask that is because quite often people ask the question, are your dreams in black and white or in no colour? And because I do graphic design, I remember having a dream discussing the colour palette of whatever I was working on and looking at whether it was CMYK, RGB or hexadecimal. So I can definitively say I know for sure that my dreams are in full colour. And in fact, they're printable colour, on-screen colour or website colour. So I have multiple colourful layers in my dream state.
Patrick, I've got a question for you. We've sort of danced around the fact that not danced around, we explicitly have said that neither of us are religious. We don't believe in the soul. So what's your story about? Is it just blank, life after death? Have you got any sort of narrative you tell yourself?
Actually, I guess, we talked about death, but we hinted at funeral kind of rites and how different cultures view death. And I guess it's not really appropriate for us to talk about other people's belief systems because we don't have that. But as a Catholic being brought up, we were taught that, when you die, the horrendous thing I think about Catholicism was the idea of purgatory. That's an awful thought that a child that isn't baptised would be forever in purgatory.
But isn't purgatory just an in-between place?
But it sounded awful.
Is it
didn't sound appealing. No. It's a one-star.
I wasn't brought up Catholic.
No, it's a one-star place with cockroaches that you go and get on Airbnb and then you give a really bad rating to. No, I don't know. Look, I didn't take a lot of note of all of that, and honestly it didn't seem like a really nice place. It was kind of in between your heaven and your hell, and it's not really a good place to be. But for me, the thing I struggled with my Catholicism was the thought that everybody else is wrong and only we're right. What about all those other lovely people that do wonderful things, and just because they haven't encountered Christianity, why do they have to suffer for eternity in hell? And why would you, if you've done something bad, look, no one deserves to suffer for eternity for anything. Like, no one.
Yeah.
Even those horrible priests. I mean that in all sincerity. I mean, as a humanist, I think everyone's, there are reasons for why people do what they do, and people do horrible things. But ultimately, we have a prison system where we try to rehabilitate people, and we hope that people can be rehabilitated. But that doesn't seem to work in a lot of religions, So I think that, if I was going to look at any religion, I'd like to think about maybe, Buddhism seems nice to me.
But that's got reincarnation.
That's right.
So what's your story? Is it just blank?
That's it.
Life blank.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah.
Life blank. Life blank.
Yeah.
That's it. Blank.
Okay.
Life blank.
So mine is a little more sort of not quite so brutal. Like I believe in the first law of thermodynamics, so that energy can't be destroyed. So I think about that as my afterlife, that I really think of myself as transforming into object status. That I came out of object status into subject status, and then I go back into object status, and I even, in a sort of narrative way, think about how, I could be a bit of earth, I could be someone's coffee table, a part of me could contribute to that, I might be gases.
That's quite
I'm
consoling.
getting around.
Yeah, so it's consoling. So what we're saying is that we've got lots of molecules that make up who we are, and taking the mind out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we both, I think, agree that our mind will cease.
But it's gone.
Is gone. But the elements that make us up,
Mm.
and then there's the argument, are we the same people we were when we were 7 years old? Are we the same person when we were 14, when we were 21? Did that person cease to exist? And there's philosophical thought processes around that, where it's believed that person does cease to exist and the new person is born as you progress through your life.
Yeah. Well, instant by instant, really. But yeah, I take comfort in that thought of my materiality having a through line that continues. My mind.
Yeah. Can I mention Dr. Duncan McDougall? I have to mention Dr. Duncan McDougall.
Yes.
Can
who's
I?
that?
Okay, so in 1907, he published an article, a scientific study, and he came to the conclusion that the soul weighs 21 grams. He weighed all these people before they died and then after they died, and came to the conclusion that the soul is 21 grams in weight.
Yes, and that's nonsense,
It is not. Yeah, of course it is. But I thought it'd be nice to finish on that one.
Yes. Well, you've been listening to OK Smartass, the podcast brought to you by a nerd and a smartass.
I'm Patrick Bonello, and you can contact us by visiting our website at oksmartass.com or email nerds@oksmartass.com.